Okay, hi everyone. It is 1 o'clock Eastern, so we will get started with this month's WonderChat. I'm Misty Hicks. I'm the co-founder of Wonders and Worries and the director of the Registered Wonders and Worries Provider Program. And thanks so much for being with us today. As usual, I have a little bit of the housekeeping that we'll go through first. But first, I wanted to thank Crystal Wilkins from Wonders and Worries, Hayley Hernandez, and Leslie Lignell for being with us today. And we are gonna let's talk. It's a little bit of a different format. We are going to have the three clinicians talk about some sort of hot topics, important subjects, just to kind of give you food for thought, maybe frame your own perspectives. So I'm excited to have these three clinicians share with us, but we'll get more to that in just a second. So let me run through the quick housekeeping. Y'all know usually you're muted and your video and your audio is off. I mean, your video and audio are both off. We will use the Q&A feature and really feel free to engage. We want this just to be a discussion between our three clinicians and you. So we'll use the Q&A feature, not the chat feature. So if you type it in the Q&A, I will monitor those and read them out loud and hopefully have those responded to verbally during the session. The recorded webinar will be on our website afterwards. And I'm going to tell you about evaluations and PDUs. So the evaluations are so important to us. When you log out of this webinar, it will automatically pop up. We would certainly appreciate you completing that. And if you miss the pop-up that comes today, an email thanking you for attending will come tomorrow, so you can certainly do the evaluation there as well. So we certainly would appreciate those coming back to us. And then the PDU process, you can certainly listen just for professional growth, but if you do need PDUs, you can click on the QR code at the end of the session or go to our website, and then you can purchase the post-assessment. It's $15 for 1.5 PDUs. Upon successful completion of the post-assessment, you'll receive your certificate by email. And I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, sorry, there we go. Did not want to keep sharing any more of my screen. And so today we are going to do Let's Talk. We're going to talk about logistics, long-term care, and language, which is something that I think is so interesting to all of us. So I would like to turn it over to Crystal, who's going to moderate this discussion today. And Crystal, Hayley, and Leslie will each share some about themselves to give you the frame of where they're coming from as we continue this discussion. Ladies.
Thanks, Missy. Yeah, this is going to be a different format. If you are used to tuning in to these webinars, most of the time it's pretty teachy. And today it's going to be more like a coffee chat. And so hopefully you have some sort of fun beverage with you, whether that's tea or coffee or a green juice, or it is Friday, so maybe you're doing happy hour early. But grab a beverage and join us. We are going to just chat. And so the format today will be, as Missy said, we're going to be talking through some different issues that come up in professional practice, and some things that early on in each of our careers we're introduced to. How do we introduce ourselves to clients? How do we talk about what we do and introduce services to families? What are professional boundaries? How do we do bereavement care and do that well? We're introduced to all these different things, but then when we get into the field, a lot of times these kind of sticky situations come up, right? Nothing ever goes exactly according to a formula. And that's when ethical issues can come up, or you have to make decisions based on your own style, your own way of being with children and families. And sometimes that's an ethical thing, and sometimes it's just a style or a matter of preference. And so we're going to talk about some of those things today, just as we would if we were sitting across on a patio. And so hopefully you'll join in, send those questions to Missy so we can hear your perspective too. But before we dive into the topics that we're going to talk about today, I want to just first of all thank Hayley and Leslie for being here. It's always great to have different clinicians, different perspectives, and both of you bring really valuable ideas and experiences from your own practice. I'm super thankful to have y'all here. So I'm going to introduce myself a little bit and then encourage you guys to do the same. But as Missy said, I work at Wonders and Worries. I'm a program director and child life specialist. I've been a child life specialist for 18 years, and I'm also a licensed professional counselor and registered play therapist at a different practice than Wonders and Worries. So I operate as a child life specialist at Wonders and Worries, and then as a play therapist elsewhere. And so you'll hear both of those perspectives. I'll try to differentiate when I'm speaking from play therapy world and when I'm speaking from child life world. Yeah, but excited to be with you guys today. Leslie, do you want to chime in and just share a little bit about your work and experience? And then Hayley, if you'll chime in after.
I'd love to, and thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our chat today. I am Leslie Lingnell, and I also have a background both in child life and in the world of play therapy, and worked in child life and in the medical setting at Children's in Dallas for almost 20 years. Had the luxury of having a very supportive child life department, and was able to, with a background in play therapy, was able to see the need and meet that need of providing ongoing services for children that would benefit from additional therapy. And so started the play therapy program there at Children's, and have then in the last 10 years been more on the side of just doing play therapy, and now doing play therapy in private practice. So I'm happy to be here today and share what knowledge I might have and gain some wisdom from you all and the questions that we get from the people that are joining us.
And my name is Hayley Hernandez. I work at Children's Medical Center in Dallas. I have been a child life specialist for a little over 3 years now. I started as PRN child life, and I covered the whole hospital, doing a variety of things in the ER, in our gen peds, oncology units, all of that. And then I transitioned to full-time working in our bone marrow transplant and oncology unit. And so I've been there for the past 2 years, covering our transplant clinic and our inpatient unit as well.
Awesome. I'm excited to have both of you here. Fun fact, Leslie and I go way back. We all have children's in common, which is really fun. And then Leslie was my practicum supervisor when I was doing my play therapy internship. And then both Leslie and Hayley have experience doing PRN and covering the whole house or whatever. And so anyways, we have a lot of little ties, right? Child life world is always an interesting little place. So, okay, well, I'm going to frame up our first topic. The first topic that we're going to talk about is how we enter into therapeutic relationships with children and the language that we use. And this was actually kind of teed up from some feedback that we got in an evaluation of a previous webinar of, is it okay to use the word friend either when we're talking to a child directly or when we are introducing a child to another colleague? So say I'm working on one unit and Hayley's working on another unit. If I said, oh, you're going to meet my friend Hayley, she does the same job that I do. Is that okay to use that kind of language? And again, certainly we all are in this work trying to describe what we do accurately to children so that they have an idea of why we're coming into their room if we work in a hospital setting, or why a child is coming into our playroom if we're working in a private practice, or at Wonders and Worries. So what in the world are we doing with them? What is this work that we're doing? And so how do we frame that up in a way that a child can hear it and understand? And so I guess for our first kind of question to answer is, what are the pros, just coming at this from a positive perspective, right? Positive psychology. What are the pros to using the word friend, either when talking to a child directly or when introducing a colleague? So if either of you have ideas on that, and then I'll throw mine in as well.
Yeah, so I personally like to use the word friend in the hospital setting. We as professionals obviously create this professional boundary between between us and the patient and the family. But I have found that using the word friend sort of softens that boundary a little bit, and kind of creates a space for me to build a therapeutic relationship with the patient, to create a safe and a warm, inviting environment, so that the patient can share, they feel comfortable sharing questions or sharing concerns about their hospitalization. And so that is what I have found, in building trust and things like that. I found that has been something that has been beneficial for me when working in the hospital.
Yeah. So it's like a tool for building rapport. It's a warm invitation to the child.
I will piggyback onto that, and I do agree, and sort of thinking about that, in both working in the hospital setting as well as working in private practice. I typically always fall back on, I'm a non-directive play therapist, and so I align with Virginia Axline's 8 basic principles. And her very first principle is that the therapist will, create a relationship. It's based in the relationship, that is based in, true warmth, as you had mentioned, Hayley, and just unconditional acceptance. And oftentimes in the hospital setting, that can't be or is not the number one priority, when medical staff are working with children. They don't have that luxury of being able to develop that warm, friendly relationship before they have to start an IV or do a medical intervention. And in child life, you are that person that comes in as that role of, I am safe, you have choices with me. And I think when using that term friend, that does conjure up an image of somebody who's warm, someone who accepts you, somebody who is building a trusting relationship with you. And so that friend is that soft word, and that it does maybe even set us aside from some of the doctors or nurses that unfortunately don't always have that luxury of waiting until that child feels a trust between them before they're having to do some medical interventions with the child.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I can remember when this question first popped up on the evaluation, and I was like, ooh, like, because I do use the word friend, and Leslie, what you were talking about with Axline's 8 principles, one of them is also like genuineness, right? And being genuine. And so I can see how some of you on the call, that might feel really disingenuine, and for others it might feel very authentic, very, very authentic to who you are. And for me, like, I refer to a lot of people as friends, like, hey friend, how's it going? And then that's just a natural kind of warm way that I engage with a lot of people. And yet for others of you, that may not be how you talk. Like, that may not, when we were first kind of planning for this, we had talked about how it might be different in different parts of the country, and different, yeah, just depending on what your own culture is, just within the city that you live in, within your family even. That may or may not be true for you, but it is for me, growing up in the South, and there are those terms of endearment that we kind of use, which might, again, may be off-putting to some people, but for me, it's it feels like me. It feels like me to say that to a child. Yeah, and so let's pivot a little bit and look at, are there any negatives? Are there any drawbacks to using the word friend? Again, either in addressing the child themselves or in framing up, kind of passing the baton to a colleague who a child is going to be working with alongside you. And so any thoughts on negatives?
I think it might tend to blur those professional boundaries that, as child life specialists or as play therapists, that we have to be so careful to make sure that we keep, because we do tend to be, we're helpers. We have those friendly personalities. This is why we found Child Life and being a play therapist, why that appealed to us, because we like working with children and families. And so sometimes it is a bit more difficult to maintain those boundaries, because parents and children see us as this fun, caring, they want to be friends with us, and we might like to be friends with, like, friends beyond that term friend that we're using, but outside maybe of the hospital setting. And so and using that term that oftentimes might, if we are not careful of where we are keeping our professional boundaries, that could blur that for some of the families and some of the children.
Mm-hmm. I've had instances too, especially with teenagers who are here, because social media is such a prevalent thing right now, and has been for a while, but they've asked to be my friend on Facebook or follow me on Instagram or Twitter, and that kind of falls under that blurring that professional boundary. Is like, well, you know, we're friends at the hospital, but outside of the hospital, we can't be friends. And so making sure that we are kind of defining the friendship a little bit and putting that boundary in place so that the patient recognizes that, you know, we're friends here, but outside of this, it doesn't go further.
Mm-hmm.
No, I do think that that is the tricky balance, right? Of how do we develop warmth, develop rapport, are authentic to who we are and our style and way of being, and then also frame up the relationship for what a child can expect when they come to us, when they see us. And so being able to define, I like, Hayley, how you talked about like kind of defining it to the hospital, like this is the context with which we're friends, similar to how a child would have school friends, and they might have church friends, and they might have friends that they play soccer with, and so kids can recognize kind of differences in those kinds of things. And so I've had I've had one child I can think of that they're trying to figure me out, right? Like, do you ever have this, like, where kids are just like, who are you and what is this? Like, I don't understand. And the child asked, so are you a teenager or are you an adult? And I was like, first of all, you're my favorite person. Which is a whole other topic, but I guess we're not supposed to have favorites, right? But yeah, like, just that, like, you're engaging with me like a child, and, you know, like, and yet you're an adult, you have some wrinkles, you have some things, you know, so it is interesting to hear how children perceive us. So I do think that context can help kind of provide that grounding. So how do you handle, Leslie, maybe speak to this a little bit, of when you've had children or clients who've been like, oh, will you come to my birthday party, or will you do that? Like, how do you respond to that?
Well, yes. When you've been in the field for as long as I have, those boundaries are so very important, because you cannot attend. I think way back in the beginning of my career, a wise person told me, if you are going to attend one, are you going to attend all? Because you can't. And again, that's not the context of our relationship. And so falling back on that grant in fantasy, what we can't grant in reality. And wouldn't it be great if I could attend your birthday party? I can tell you're really excited about it, and I look forward to hearing about it next time we see each other. And usually that is enough, that I've recognized that they are excited about this event. We have a relationship, and it would be great if I could be there. They would like that. But without really having to say no, I'm just going to recognize that you're really looking forward to that, and it would be neat if I could be there. And if I needed to go further into it, I would say, but, you know, my job is here at the hospital, and I get to see you when you come to the hospital, or I'll see you here in the playroom. And next week, I'm looking forward to hearing all about your party.
Yeah, that's great. I know for me, I've sometimes referenced back to, which sometimes this feels a little bit rude. Y'all can tell me if I'm being rude. But I had a preteen recently who asked me, he had gone to one of those escape room places or whatever. And I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds like so much fun. I can imagine you were really good at that. Like, he's got this great mind that problem solves. And so I was just like, I bet your brain doing that, like, I bet that was right up your wheelhouse. And I was like, I should do that. I've never done that before. And he was like, well, when you go, like, you need to text my mom and you need to tell her, like, to take me with you. And and I was like, oh, like, that seems like a really fun idea. And similar to what you just said, Leslie, of just grant and fantasy. But then I did refer back and I was like, you know, it's kind of tricky because this is, as much as like we have fun together and we play games together and we do art together and we do all of that kind of stuff, this is my job. And so I have certain rules that I have to follow. And one of those is that I can't do kind of social things, you know, like that's something that you would do with a buddy that you see at school. And so that's where I have to draw a line. And he's like, who told you that? And
Didn't like that answer.
he didn't like that, but I was just
roll
like,
up.
well, my boss in the state of Texas, and you know, and yeah, he was just like, well, you need to tell your boss he's being a little dramatic. Like, yeah, that's a lot. But he was able to accept it though. It was one of those things where he was just like, oh, okay, like, this is outside your control. And so it's not a matter of affection. It's not like I wouldn't want to do that, like you said, but it's just a matter of, this isn't my role with you. So, yeah. Anything else, either for or against, that you think is important as we think about this topic? And then Missy, I want to invite you if there's been any comments or questions that have come in, or if you've been listening in and you're like, should I put this in or not? Go ahead and throw it in the chat. But any other ideas regarding pros and cons?
Well, I know we've just really been talking specifically about the word friend and sort of, you know, how it could be appropriate or maybe when it wouldn't be appropriate. But I do think it is important to consider how our use of communication and other words that we might not always realize in our attempt to build relationships with children or to sort of be at their level or within our linguistics, thinking about the words that we use in terms of, you know, sweetie, or you know, my boyfriend's here, let's go into the playroom, or like those are very different words than the therapeutic use of the word friend. And I think it is important to keep those in mind. And I just think about that in terms of, you know, we all work with people, especially if you're working in a hospital setting, that you do see that there are professionals that you work with that do have a difficult time with boundaries and those relationships. And you'll see that can be very confusing for children when those terms are used that are really out of the context of the professional relationship.
Yeah. Well, it feels like to me, like what you're describing, like especially using the word like boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, there's putting a like romantic label on something that sometimes we as adults do that way too young. Anyways, just in general, to where it's almost embarrassing, I think, or a point of like, I don't know, elevating, amplifying something that doesn't have to be. And so I can see the difference between those two, but I think you're accurate that not everybody does. And that can be kind of tricky.
Well, nice too, if a patient ever said to me, like, they were uncomfortable with me using that, like the word friend, or they weren't comfortable with that, then obviously, you know, that's a big red flag too. Or, you know, if they are having, like, there's another staff member and they say something like use the word friend or boyfriend or something that makes them feel uncomfortable and they share that, I think it's up to us too to educate staff and what's appropriate and what's not.
on being responsive, right, to what the child is asking of you. If they feel uncomfortable and they're brave enough to share that, that's awesome. And then to respect that is really, really important. So that's a good point. Missy, I think a couple of things have come in. Do you want to feed us anything?
I do. I have two different things here, but I just wanted to share two other comments too. When I think about this topic, and I think about the use of the word friend and how it did come in, the question came in the evaluations. And I guess for me, when I'm thinking about, again, like there's lots of different options and way to think through things. But when I think about like introducing a colleague from another department as friend, and just one of the things to tease through for me was always, if I'm saying this is my friend from radiology, is that putting an undue responsibility on the child to accept that person as their friend too, right? And so I always had to just sort of think through that a little bit. And again, all of this is just, we're all sharing different perspectives because we want you guys, the listeners, to frame your own perspective and take this. There's no right or wrong answer really in this, but it really is just to make sure you feel comfortable with the responses that you're giving and the way you're interacting with the children and families in front of you. So anyway, that was just sort of my thought is about the whole like pass off piece of it and thinking a little bit about that use of the word friend in that context.
Yeah, no. Do y'all have anything to share on that? Leslie and Hayley?
I think I've done that before, Missy, where I've said, oh, you're going to go down for a CT scan or something, and you're going to meet my friend. I've gone a step further of defining their role and saying they do the same job as me, and they're also a child life specialist. They're also someone who you can ask questions to, or you can voice concerns. And so I've gone a little bit further in identifying their role so that they don't necessarily feel the pressure to like, oh, okay, I don't know this person, but maybe I should have to really like them, and they may not like them at all. And that's okay too. It's a great point.
Yeah. And I appreciate that, Hayley, and I agree. I feel like, and you said this earlier too, about sort of when we say things, defining it, right? Because the more we can define something for clarity, the better it's going to be for everyone involved, right? So if you use a word in anything, really, if you use a word and then you define it, I think that frames up the context the right way, hopefully, for the child and family.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes you'll even get a response from a child, right? Of like, if you're saying, oh, you're going to meet my friend Megan in radiology, then it's like, oh, but it's not going to be you. Mm-hmm. And then you can say, oh, I know you really trust me. And like we've gotten to do some important things together. I'm so thankful you feel comfortable. My hope is that you feel comfortable with Megan too. Like she's warm, she's friendly, she's got these things, like, again, kind of defining all of those kind of guardrails for what makes Megan a comfortable person to potentially trust. Not the same, but similar role, similar function. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, y'all. We do have two questions, so let me throw those in. So first one, they're two kind of different. So we're going to go with the first one. What about receiving gifts? Y'all comment on the receiving gifts.
Who wants to go? I have a thought, but
I can go first. We actually have a hospital policy, and so that kind of helps. I kind of use that as my way to decline a gift. So our hospital policy is that we are allowed to accept food, but we're not allowed to accept anything else. And so I kind of use that as my way to kind of go around in like a polite way. And I will usually say, oh, this is so thoughtful. Thank you so much for thinking of me and wanting to acknowledge my hard work or the nurse's hard work. Unfortunately, our hospital doesn't allow us to do this or to accept this. And if it's something that potentially could be used for another patient, like if it's something like an item that I could frame it in a way, oh, would you like to donate this to our department? We can use it in this way. And so I've kind of been able to reframe, and a lot of families sometimes are like, oh yes, absolutely, like they understand, but that's just kind of what we do here at the hospital and framing it in that way.
Yeah, I think the policies, again, provide a guardrail, right? Like I can think of, I think in different contexts, every hospital is a little bit different. Sometimes they'll put a price limit. Sometimes it's what's being given that is kind of where the limit is. I can remember at one hospital that I worked in, it was like a $50 limit, and one family I can think of brought something that was clearly more than that. And so I just shared the policy and just said, I'm going to share this with some of the other nurses, and so I'll take something. But then for the other caregivers that have been taking care of you, is it okay that if I share that? I need to share it with somebody. And the family was able to like appreciate that and recognize that, oh, their gift is going even further than what they had intended it to be. But I've also had the situation, and Leslie, I'd love your input on this too, of like, what is the therapeutic goal? Like, what is the child trying to communicate with the gift? And because I've had kids who give me something that it doesn't cost anything, right? It's a note, it's a picture, it's something, but I can think of two children in particular that every time they came, they brought me something. And it almost, it felt like it was payment, that it was something that like, I'm giving you something because you're giving me something in the playroom. And so that was something with those two clients in particular, I had to really emphasize, like, it's really special to you that you thank me for the work that we're doing, but the time that we have together is thank you enough. So I'll take your picture, but this isn't something you have to do. But it did persist to the point that I can remember one little girl, it wasn't until she saw her mom paying me for a session that she goes, oh, okay. And then she never made me anything again, which was very interesting. And then another little girl, it just took more time for her to develop, I think, enough confidence that what she was doing with me was so valuable. Like what we were doing together in the playroom was so valuable. And so I do think we have to think about gifts in those terms too, even if it's not a dollar value, of what is the intention behind this, and just again using our language carefully to be able to communicate like what we are doing here is beautiful and there's no more needed than what we're doing. So Leslie, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, you said it beautifully. It's so important that the recognition of the relationship is there, and that there isn't, and I guess since we're talking about communication, it really is something to really think about how, so if you overly if you accept a gift and you're just like, oh my gosh, I love this, this is so awesome, and thank you, thank you, thank you, that is almost external praise that will really motivate them to continue to give. And so I love what you said, Crystal, in terms of, really looking beyond the gift and where is this really coming from with the child, and noticing the child. And if it is something that they made and they put a lot of effort into making it, noticing the effort and acknowledging the child and the choices and what it meant to them, so that it's not about the gift, that it's about the child, and it's about the relationship, that the child is recognizing that I have a relationship with you and I want to show you that I appreciate it. And so acknowledging that to the child, not giving too much even credit to the actual gift itself, because I would tend to think that, then the child gets motivated by, and, there's always, in thinking about, everybody's probably familiar with the 5 love languages, right? And gift giving is a language of expressing love. And so, thinking about that in terms of where is this coming from, and acknowledging that aspect of it, and not just focusing on the actual gift. That makes sense.
Yeah, sure. It does. I hadn't correlated that with external praise. But I think that, you know, and again, not that praise is evil, it's just that internal locus of control and children having that intrinsic sense of value is most important. And so we want to be able to reinforce that as much as we can.
Yeah.
That's good.
Crystal?
Yeah.
There's another question that sort of is before we pivot into the next topic, which, because I know it's a switch. But this question is kind of relevant here. I'm curious about how you approach attending fundraisers or walks, especially on behalf or with a specific child or family.
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm trying to think in both of my hats at Wonders and Worries, as well as previously in my work with children. I haven't gone to a lot of personal walks or fundraisers, if that makes sense. Like if it's a child with cancer who the family is raising money for their medical expenses or whatever, that's not something that I don't think I've ever done that. But we do at Wonders and Worries have some families who will do kind of a fundraiser on our behalf. That's kind of their way of giving back. And so there have been times that either myself or another representative of Wonders and Worries is present for that because it's directly benefiting our organization. And if I'm the primary child life specialist with them, I'm their touch point to the organization. And so there have been times where that's been the case, or where I know that other child life specialists who have been connected to a family will do that. It's not always that, like we don't necessarily always attend. Sometimes we'll be the one that receives it, right? When they come into the office and they're bringing the check or they're bringing the pictures of whatever they did, so that we can thank them for giving back and make that special for them. But I haven't done anything personal. So can y'all comment on that?
Well, I think I was thinking back to that too, and along the same lines, you haven't done anything, you haven't gone to any personal benefits. I have not gone to any personal benefits, and that is because we have professional boundaries.
Yeah.
And so you would not go to a personal benefit of fundraising for a family.
Yeah.
That there would need to be a professional boundary, even if they probably invited you. That is, I would venture to say that is out of the scope of your professional relationship with the family to attend.
Yeah.
Something in that nature.
And I think it goes back to what you said earlier of like, can you go to all of them? Because the reality is that we can't. Like we are limited humans, and so we cannot, especially if you're working in a population like oncology where there's a lot. There's a lot of them. And so can you feasibly do that?
I've also never been to a personal benefit. What you were saying, Crystal, that often we're the ones receiving. We have had that where families are donating in honor of their child, or they've just done a toy drive. And so I've participated in those things, but that's when they're coming up to the hospital and donating and doing a presentation. But I can't speak to the personal.
Yeah. It seems like we're all in alignment that on the personal, we do see that that's a professional boundary, but whereas the receiving, there's something therapeutic about a family being able to give back or give in honor of a child. And so being able to be the facilitator of that therapeutic process, it seems like we're all like, we can do that. Like, and because we recognize the therapeutic value of it, and we are the facilitators of lots of therapeutic things. And so that's one of them. And so whether it's because a child has died, or they have, or a parent has died, or they beat cancer and they want to celebrate that, and this is their way of paying that forward to other families who are walking through that journey. In either circumstance, we can be supportive of that process. So cool, great questions, Missy. Anything else before we shift to our next topic?
There's just a comment in here that I'll read out loud, and if you guys have anything you want to comment back to it. But she says, I see a boundaries problem at my hospital of staff, most specifically nurses buying t-shirts from families for the child's awareness fundraiser, et cetera, fighting cancer for Connor. And then there is a question next. Do you guys want to comment on that, or are you just go to the question?
I think that exists everywhere.
Yeah.
We are seeing that here at Children's too.
And I think that that's one place where maybe child life specialists, this is going to sound egotistical maybe, like we do it better, where I think we just have maybe firmer boundaries, and we get to model for our colleagues, right? We get to model that we don't have to buy every t-shirt, we don't have to buy every candy bar, we don't have to buy every Girl Scout cookie to be able to say that we're in this with you, that we can do that a different way. And so we get to model that for nurses and doctors and all the different professionals that maybe don't have the same kind of guidance or teaching or whatever around professional boundaries. And so we can model for them and express that valuing of, like, you can care very faithfully for this family without having to do that. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that by not buying the t-shirt. And yet I want to cure cancer, and and I want to support Connor, and I want to, I want to do all of those things too. I'm just going to do it in a different way. And so I'm going to uphold my boundary and still be in support of that. And this is how I'm choosing to fight for cancer research and cancer cure and all the kids that are fighting cancer, or all the parents that are fighting cancer. So, but it is tricky. It's a hard and uncomfortable place to be when you're the one holding the line and not a lot of other people are. And so I would go back to, like, having kind of a in your back pocket kind of script to share with a family if they're saying, well, Nurse Susie, she bought one, and Chaplain so-and-so bought one. Be like, I know that's really confusing, isn't it? And just be able to say, like, I know that you trust that I want to cure, and I want your cure, and to be able to communicate, like, I'm fighting with you. I'm just going to do this in a different way. So.
For sure, a hard place to be, to do.
There's
Y'all, I do have another question in here, which I'm going to read to you just so you have it tucked in the back of your brain, because I think it sort of will relate to your next discussion topic. So I'm just going to say it, and then I'm going to let you pivot, Crystal. So the question is, what about when you receive donations from a past family and they have attached photos of the child that passed? Do you remove it from the item before passing it out? Because I know you're moving on to talking about relationships sort of in the continuum. So let's hold that one, and if you guys want to switch gears.
Okay, I'm going to tuck that away. Make sure that I come back to it if I forget. Okay, we are shifting. Our next topic is relationships after loss. And this is a topic that I think all of us are pretty passionate about, and yet see things kind of differently. And so, similar to what Missy said before, of it's not necessarily about being right or wrong. We don't all have to be on the same page on all of these things. But let's talk about it. And so when either a child dies or a parent of a child dies that we're working with, how do we continue that relationship, or do we? And do we attend funerals, or don't we? And why or why not? And so I guess for each of you, Hayley and Leslie, if y'all want to kind of talk about what does it look like? And again, you might have particular parameters that are required based on the systems that you work in, or it might be more of a personal decision. But can y'all speak to what do relationships look like after a loss? And then how do you feel about funeral attendance? And then once y'all share, I'll share my thing. So.
Okay, let's see. Am I muted? No. Okay.
You're
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, it's something that we can talk at length about, and we have a bit before, but again, remembering that we're all human, and we have entered into a relationship with this child, with this family, and so we have to also remember to honor our own selves and what this relationship did mean to us. Yes, we worked hard to keep it professional, but we're still human. And these children do touch our lives. And the situations are when the child dies, it's always devastating, and it's hard to see the devastation that happens to the family, to staff, and to your own self. And there is what we do call a disenfranchised grief, and we experience that grief when a child dies. And what disenfranchised grief is when you you have a relationship that might not get honored in a way that you would want that relationship to be honored. So we're not related to that child. And so we might not give ourselves permission to have the grief that we have, because this wasn't, you know, our child or our niece or nephew, or even our best friend's children or child. And so we might not give ourselves that permission, or society doesn't really give us that credit to have that grief that that we do experience. And so it's, for me, it was always I always wanted to make sure that I have closure on that relationship in a way that I felt good about it. So if I had the experience with the child in the family at the hospital, and I felt like that I had that closure that worked for me, or then that might have been fine. And it was a case by case basis that I would assess why I would maybe go to the funeral. And there were times when maybe I felt okay about the closure, but the family requested that I come to the funeral, maybe to speak, or maybe just to be there, to be supportive of siblings. In my experience, and we can talk more about this after Hayley shares her experience, but the family goes through, especially for children who had long-term illness and practically lived at the hospital, that grief for the parents is not only the loss of that child, but the loss of what they considered a second family in the hospital. And it does tend to mean a lot to them when they do see members of that family attend their child's funeral.
Yep,
Hayley?
that's
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Leslie, all of those things. I'm just going to piggyback off of what you said. I also want to make sure that I am honoring the child in my own way, and not. I personally don't attend funerals. It's just for my self-care. And I have identified my own self-care routine after one of my patients passed that helps get me through that grieving process. But we definitely see that a lot at the hospital, Leslie, like what you were saying of, it's not only the loss of a child, but also their second home and their second family, especially with my population working in transplant. They're here for months and months at a time. And so this is their second home. And so we at the hospital have our chaplains and social workers are typically the ones who will follow up post their child passing, and will follow up and check in. And as far as child life, we all have different styles and do different things, but I always give my families my card and kind of put the ball in their court and tell them, please reach out if you need extra support with siblings, or you need to process through things, or if you need resources to reach out to other members of the community, grief counseling or things like that. But as far as our typical process, our pastoral care and social workers kind of handle that piece of it.
Yeah. Thank y'all both for sharing, because I do think sometimes when a question like this comes up, and we hear it all the time, right? it can feel like we need to have the right answer, and yet the right answer for you might be different than the right answer for me, and that gets really confusing, as especially I think for new child life specialists or students that are coming into the field. It's like, well, I haven't experienced this before, so I don't really know what my process is, and I don't really know what to do. And so it is tricky, but I love, Leslie, what you were talking about with disenfranchised grief. I know I experienced it. Like, I know I absolutely experienced that in oncology. And I hit really bad places of burnout when I was doing, I think, the cumulative effect when you're experiencing loss after loss after loss after loss. And you aren't engaging in any kind of practice, whether it's going to the funeral or doing another self-care practice. It doesn't matter what it is. It's the fact that you're doing it. And I can remember one of my therapists telling me, like, we have rituals for a reason. There's rituals around grief for a reason, because it helps our heart and our brain connect the reality of the loss and our life moving forward from it, and kind of integrating those things, the loss, into our world. And so we teach that, right? Like, we teach that to parents, we teach that to siblings, of like, how can you do this? And we create those rituals for them. But if we aren't engaging in that ourselves, we're going to naturally have some fallout. And so I think that's just really an important note. And I think as helpers, we're really good at helping other people. We're not so great at doing it for ourselves. And so I think it's just, no matter what the process is, you need to find yours. And so as far as attending funerals, I did. I didn't do it across the board, which might feel kind of confusing. And sometimes I went in support of siblings that I was close to, and other times I went for myself. And so it was different. But there's also so much nuance to, like, how did you go? Do you sit in the front row? Do you sit in the back row? Do you know, like, there's a lot of different ways to engage depending on what your role is and your goal in support of the family or in support of yourself. And so I think there's lots of flexibility so that you're not an intrusive, like, and I would err on the side of, if I felt like my presence would be intrusive for the family, I would not go. And I think that has to be the priority of, like, what is going to be best for the client or the child that you're supporting. And if me being there, if I have that kind of intuitive gut feeling of, like, I'm not sure that would be received well, then we need to prioritize that and then find another way to process that grief on our own. But I did attend a lot of funerals, specifically when I was in oncology. And I can say, with being at Wonders and Worries, one of the things that I think is very unique about Wonders and Worries that was just like breath in my lungs when I moved into this position was that we get to continue care. We get to continue care with children, that the work that we're doing doesn't have to end at loss, but that we can continue that therapeutic work. And that doesn't necessarily mean we have great bereavement centers in Austin. We have great bereavement centers in San Antonio and Houston where we are embedded, that we oftentimes do pass the baton to those. But when we already have an established relationship, what we find is that a lot of times families want to continue on with us. And so we don't necessarily just break that just because it's a rule. And so we can continue that therapeutic work, especially recognizing that sometimes families won't shift and won't make that transition. And so I have loved the flexibility that Wonders and Worries has given me, where it wasn't this hard, fast rule that you can't do this, because I do think about so many of the siblings that I worked with in oncology and a lot of the parents that I worked with in oncology. And I'm like, oh, we weren't done. Like, we weren't done. There was more to be done. And so I would love, Leslie, I know you started Camp Soul, and so I'd love for you to speak a little bit of kind of how that originated, and because I think it comes from kind of the same heartbeat of how Wonders and Worries has framed up how we do long-term care.
Right, and well, and you know, it was out of that sort of frustration of working with families in oncology, neuro-oncology. I worked in neuro-oncology for all of my career. And so I attended a lot of funerals, and I had families that I worked with for years. And so I had oftentimes the fortunate experience of working side by side with the hospice community and being able to go into the home and work with the child or siblings. And so, and then continue that work after as well. And so that's where you saw that power. And that's where, for my own professional sort of nurturing, that I could continue on. And families don't like to, they're exhausted after, and they don't want to start. It's even hard oftentimes, you know this, for them to go on to hospice and get a new group. They are so comfortable with who they've been seeing, and they don't want to have to tell their story again. And the really neat thing too is that they like working with people who knew that child. They don't have to prove to you how special that child was, because they know that you knew that child and you knew how special they were. And so it is difficult, and that, we're always looking for that continuity of care for families. And so out of that came Camp Soul, which a colleague that was actually working in trauma at the time, we saw that need, that we were feeling so frustrated that we didn't have something. Families would come back to us and say, can we'd love to keep working with you, but we can't come back to the hospital, because that's a step in the grief process. But really, my job was at the hospital, right? And families will tell you they feel very cut off after the death of their child, and returning and not seeing any of those people. So we started Camp Soul, which is a specifically designed to meet the needs of the entire family of a child who has died. And so it's not grief support for children, not grief support for adults, but for an entire family. And it's a family retreat, and it's held here in Texas, and meets twice a year. We've also grown and done other support programs, like a back to school program, so that we can prepare families as they move into that next developmental stage, for the siblings, as well as in their grief, because we know that's based in development. Families, after a year, after 2 years, they're not over it. They are going to grieve every year for the development that child would have been in. And that's difficult. And it's difficult for them to know and understand that, because they might be 5 years out from the death of their child and think, I should be doing well. It's been 5 years. Everybody expects me to be doing well. Why did it hit me so hard? Oh, because your child would have been 16 and gotten her driver's license this year. And that is a grief. And so starting Camp Soul was something that it really invigorated me professionally, and I think helped with not getting burnt out, because I was able to continue working with some families that I had worked with, and I continue doing Camp Soul now, and I don't work in the hospital setting, but it is an opportunity to give back and meet families in their grief process, and facilitate them meeting other families, and just continuing to support them in that way.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that has been invigorating and healing for you, healing for the families, healing for all the people. I know I got to participate in Camp Soul, and that was something, that was a gift to me of, I think when I started going to Camp Soul, it was after I was in oncology, and I was working in the ER, and so I was experiencing still grief and death, but I didn't know the child, and so it was different, or it felt different to me, not less important. I think oftentimes harder in different ways for the families that are experiencing it, because it's sudden. But for me, it was different. And going back to Camp Soul, even though it was different families I was working with, there was a therapeutic process for me of, I can continue this work even with different children or different families, different parents, that it allowed for something that was really special. So I'm really thankful that you.
Well, what's neat about camps is also the volunteers that come out to help facilitate the groups are within the medical setting. They are child life specialists, social workers, nurses, and even if you aren't that if that family did not work with you, they see that, and that gives them that comfort because they know that you know what their experience was. And it is very different for them to engage with professionals that don't understand what life is like in a hospital setting or having a child with long term. We've had, you know, we've had volunteers come out that that didn't have that experience, and not to say that we can't have volunteers come out to camp that don't understand that, but the families see and know that you didn't have to know their child to know where they've come from and what their experience was like.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, just sort of along this similar line, Sydney shared a comment in the question about ceremony of remembrances at hospitals, and that they do that each year. I think many hospitals will do that, which is a nice way then for staff to be able to engage and support families of children who have died in that previous year. Sydney shares that Child Life is in charge of it at her hospital, and they have therapeutic activities at the event. So that's just another way for that continuity to happen and that sort of closure and that support over time.
Yeah. Well,
Thanks.
Thank you, Sydney. Thank you for sharing that, because I do think, especially kind of coming off the heels of what we just talked about with boundaries, I think sometimes like nurses, doctors, chaplains, social workers, sometimes that maybe you're more tempted to break a boundary or something. A lot of times it's because they don't get that closure. They don't get, and they don't know that they need it. And so I think sometimes those remembrance ceremonies, or however you as an organization cultivate that process, whether it's a remembrance ceremony, it's a camp, it's whatever, like having participants from staff go through that too is so healing. It's just so healing. And again, I don't think that oftentimes nurses are able to do that. You know, they may not have time capacity, whatever, or they may just not think, they think differently, right? Like we're the emotional, feely people. They're the science, that they're getting things done, but they also have that big, huge heart that makes them great at what they do. But they oftentimes don't know how to care for it. And so again, we get to model for them, like, maybe this would be valuable for you to go and do this. And yeah, it's different families than the ones that you worked for, but the process of it, I think, will be healing for you and healing for the families that get to work with you, because you know you've walked in lots of grief. And so you have a perspective that's valuable. And so, yeah, I think that's super awesome that hospitals do that. Any other thoughts or questions? Any other questions coming in from the audience, Missy?
Nothing at the moment. I'm going to hold this one because I think you're going to sort of talk about relationships sort of after the death, like not so much the funeral piece of it, but what happens later piece. So I'll let you guys start on there, and then this question may fit.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of I said this a little bit, but just working at Wonders and Worries, we do get to continue that aftercare. And that has been awesome for me, and I do think it's awesome for the families, where it doesn't have to just be cut off, where we get to continue that work for as long as the family needs it. And sometimes that's one session, sometimes it's two, sometimes we have monthly check-in groups where kids can come back monthly for as long as they need to, or they might come for a month and then skip for 6 months and pop back in, when they experience a different thing, like grief. We have these like models of grief, right, that feel linear, and yet we all know that's not true. And grief continues on long beyond the death. And so we've created kind of structure at Wonders and Worries to where kids, when they do either hit a new developmental stage of development where they have to reprocess through that grief, or they've gone to school and somebody wore something that their sister did, or their, like whatever triggered a grief response. They need a check-in. They need support. They need kind of a place where they can feel cared for with people who know. That's kind of how we do it at Wonders of Grace. We have our monthly grief check-in group, and then we do oftentimes refer families to bereavement centers, because bereavement centers do solely that, and they have sometimes things that we don't have the structure for at Wonders and Grace, so we always offer that as a choice. But then we have ways for families to continue to reconnect. But Leslie and Hayley, are there other things that you want to highlight within either the hospital or in your practice that
it does at the hospital. That is kind of one of the negatives, is that we don't get to necessarily continue that relationship unless the family requests that or reaches out for support. But one of the things that it's unique to oncology is that families often want to donate items, and they do fundraisers and things in honor of their child. And so we are able to maintain that relationship with the family. It's a therapeutic process for them. It's a therapeutic process for us, because often the whole family will come. And before COVID, we were able to do more special event type things when visitors could come to the hospital. Now it looks a little bit different. But those families still get to see us, and they still get to see some of the staff members, and they invite doctors to come if they're hosting a little special event up here at the hospital. And so that's something that is a little is more unique to the hospital setting, and we're still able to maintain that therapeutic relationship and check in with the family through those events. So
that's great. And I think Missy maybe has a question. Yeah,
I do. So I appreciate you sharing that, because actually it was the perfect segue to drop this question back in about donations and donations that come from families of children who have died. And she's more specifically saying that they're donating these items with a picture, a photo of the child who died attached to it, and wants the staff to hand those out to current families. And so there's that struggle, right? That internal conflict of, these families still have hope for remission, for cure, like they have that piece of it, and the sort of the discomfort or the trying to process, is it appropriate to hand those out to those families when that situation is different? Have you had that experience, or can you speak to that, or all of you, can you all speak to that?
Yeah, we've had that experience a few times. I think for us it depends on what, is it just the picture? Is there a picture with this like a whole message, or a scripture, or it kind of depends. It's kind of not a direct answer, but it just kind of depends. If it's just a photo and it has if they have a foundation in honor of their child or their loved one, and it's just like their logo or something like that, we usually keep that on, and it's up to the discretion of the family if they want to research that organization or not. In my experience, I've actually had families research these foundations, and they love it. They love to hear other people's stories. They feel like they're not alone, and they feel like there's someone out there that they can relate to and who knows what they're going through. If there is a scripture or something along those lines, we do take those off, solely because not every family believes in scripture or whatever. Everybody has different beliefs, and so we want to be mindful and respectful in that way. So I don't know if that kind of answers the question a little bit, but that's been our experience here.
I think to take the picture off, if it's a picture of the child and maybe it's an organization, or just a picture of the child, and taking it off, if you're taking it off because you're trying to caretake and save those families from this awful idea of that children die, then you're really not doing a service for the family, because it is like what you said, Hayley, that for the reality of it is that if your child is in the hospital and is diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, the parent has already had that thought of, could my child die from this?
Right.
Or the parents have already realized that children die. And that is awful. But you can survive it, and you can learn to cope with it. And this is a positive way of coping and honoring your child. And this shows those families that family, and this is what we've learned from Camp Soul. I had a dad once say, like, I couldn't imagine people would come out to camp, and I didn't, of course he was admitting that this wasn't what he wanted to do. But when he saw other dads fishing together and enjoying each other's companies, and he said, I realized at that time that I can survive this, and I can do it and people have done it before me, and I'm not alone in this. And so we have to, I guess, maybe think about, are we trying to overprotect and not allow for families to realize or to know something that they're already thinking?
I love that. I think that we do sometimes in an attempt to control, right? Like it is that protective, like, oh, I want to wrap you in bubble wrap and just don't look at the scary, sad things.
Mm-hmm.
And but yet, yeah, we get put in the middle of, we want the family to be able to honor their child, and we want to protect these other families from something that they're already thinking. I think that's a really important point. I do like what you said, Hayley, though, of like when a family has shared scripture or like a very like personal letter or something like that, then recognizing like the therapeutic process for them was really writing that letter or attaching the scripture that has given them hope, given them endurance. And so you don't necessarily have to include that to still honor the child. Like there's still a way to do that. The systems girl in me, I'm a program director, so forgive me for this, but I also think having kind of guidelines for like, hey, this is how we do the give backs. Like this is so that families proactively know, like, I get to do this, but these are the guardrails, so that it is something that you don't have to tweak and edit. Excuse me. Once you receive it, can also help on the front end. So as much as your hospital, your unit, our organization, your practice, whatever, as much as you can give them that forward information, then it allows you to receive it in a way that's honoring for the child and good for the families receiving it. So you can't always predict, and you can't always, catch
Great
everything.
question. That was a great
question. Yeah. Missy, anything else before we shift to our last topic? I know we definitely want to get to this one too and leave a little bit.
I think we could go ahead and shift. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Our last topic for today is talking about, sorry, that was kind of like an abrupt, like, breaks. Now we're shifting. Sorry if that was jarring. But we are going to shift to virtual sessions. We recognize that honestly, WonderChat started when COVID began as a way to connect as colleagues, as professionals who are trying to figure things out in a virtual world when we're used to being in our playrooms and used to being feet on the ground with kids. And so the question now that COVID's over, it's not over. It's not over, people. What do we do now, right? Like we're in this messy middle of it's not really gone yet, and yet we're seeing more people in person, and yet do we continue anything virtually? When do we do that? How do we do that? All of that kind of stuff. And so I would love to, again, just kind of tee you guys up to talk about what y'all learned in offering virtual sessions to clients, to families in the hospital, of what did you do, how did you determine which children you were going to see in that way or families you were going to see in that way, and how. And then as we move forward, what are kind of your rules now? And we've talked a little bit about this from a Wonders and Worries perspective, so I really want to have the focus be on you guys, and I'll throw some things in at the end. But yeah, Hayley, do you want to start us off? What you did during COVID in the hospital, and then what you're shifting to now?
Yes. So our hospital policy right now is we are allowed to have 2 caregivers at the bedside, but that is it. So we are not allowed to have any other outside visitors, and that's actually still a rule right now. So that was put into place at the beginning of COVID, and it's still kind of lingered as we're going through this season. But we got an approved children's email, and we have our approved children's iPads. And so we started offering FaceTime visits. And for us, it was all about assessing. And so meeting with the parents and making the assessment for sibling support. And, does your child already know about FaceTime? Are they pretty involved? Are they a child who typically gets distracted very easily? How old they are? Making all of those assessments to determine if FaceTime was something that would be beneficial, and then knowing ahead of time too, okay, this is a patient or a sibling who may or may not be as engaged, and so I have approximately 5 minutes. What are my high points? And so we kind of started there, and it's grown from there. We have done virtual school visits. One of the specialists on our team, she has done a FaceTime with a class. And then me and another coworker, we've filmed ourselves providing, it's a quick 5-minute video hitting the high points that teachers can play for their classes to help now that school has started up this year. So we've kind of progressed from where everything was shut down, nobody was going to school, we didn't hardly have anything, to now where we're doing these virtual school visits as well, in addition to FaceTime, because we still have those guidelines in place. So that's what we are currently doing and we're currently offering. I will offer as many FaceTime visits as possible and as necessary, or as much as the family wants to do. I'm always available and open. I feel like now too, we've kind of lived in this virtual world for almost 2 years now. And so kids now, they're used to it. They've been doing it at school. They've been doing it for a while. And so I will say our sessions have gotten better, and we've all gotten a little bit better about FaceTime and virtual things. So
no, thank you for sharing that. I love that you have worked with the schools. I love that schools are still open to doing that too. I love that you've thought creatively about different ways to do that and to offer that, so that didn't disrupt the breadth of services that you could offer to families. So that's really awesome. And yeah, confidence is built with more reps, right? Like, so the longer you do it, like the more it gets easier. And I realized my face did something weird. I had a surprise face, something fell. So I'm fine. But if you wondered why I made that face, sorry, friends. Okay, Leslie, how about for you? Tell us a little bit about your practice and what you did.
Well, as a play therapist, my world was turned upside down because, of course, it was like, what? How am I going to do this? That's impossible. And so I had my little breakdown. And after I learned how to do school for my children online, then I pivoted and figured out how am I going to meet the needs of my clients. And I do, in my private practice, I do have children with medical needs. And so I did have a couple that ended up with hospitalizations in this last year and a half, one with a very lengthy hospitalization. And so telehealth actually ended up being a blessing because we were able to continue with the continuity of our relationship and some predictability even though one of my clients was hospitalized across the country. And so using through our platform of Simple Practice and having a telehealth option, I did continue, again, developmentally, or depending on, why some kids were already coming to see me, telehealth might not have been appropriate. And I learned that, right? Well, let's give it a shot. And then when I knew, okay, this mom is not going to be happy that kinetic sand is embedded in the keyboard, we either will not do another one of these, or we will not have Play-Doh or kinetic sand in our sessions. But one really neat thing, and it has my colleagues and I kind of thinking about shifting a little bit about our practice, is that we were able to do what we call filial therapy, and that's actually parent training, where we train parents in play therapy skills so that they're having weekly play sessions at home, which is something that I did a lot at it in a group setting at the hospital, and then have done in private practice more one-on-one with parents, but more towards the end of working with their child and getting ready to transition the therapeutic interventions into the home. But the only thing I could offer for some of these 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, I knew I was not going to be able to start a therapeutic relationship with a child online. And so I did do a lot of filial therapy. And I can tell you, I probably have worked with over 30 parents and have never had to meet with the child. That was so successful that parents were able to implement the skill set at home and do play therapy sessions in the home. And so that's been really neat and successful. And so there are aspects of it that we may keep. It also allowed for a mom and dad to be able to do the session together, because dad could be at work and mom could be at home, but we could all three be on the computer together. And so there were some conveniences. But I would always opt to see a child in person other than virtually. But having, I think before the pandemic, I would have been extremely resistant to ever even doing anything online with a child.
For sure. Yeah, I love, again, that you just maximized like what you were able to do, and were able to see the blessings of what COVID offered you, even though it also had its limitations. And yeah, I would say that our team, we've said this before, we've done a lot more parenting work amidst COVID, and done a lot, and parents have been hungry for it, like where before COVID, sometimes it was like pulling teeth to try to get them to engage. And it's like, oh, well, if you'll do that, I'll just sit back here. And not that they're sitting, parents are never sitting, that's 24/7, but just like, I'm going to let you take that. And so with this, it's like, oh, this limitation where I can't see Miss Leslie, or I can't see Miss Crystal or Hayley, then it's like, oh, I've got to build in these skills, which then we know is going to serve them for a lifetime with their child and their relationship with their child. And so,
and they were home way more with their children than they ever had been. And so they were desperate, like you said, for the skills. They needed them right away. And they were able to implement the skills right away. They didn't have these busy schedules. That was a neat thing, that they would come back each week and they would have done there, because they weren't interrupted by soccer, football, and hockey,
all the things,
dance. They were able to get started. So that was neat.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's such an important message, I think, in general, right? Like when we think about the overscheduling of children in many ways, of like, what a gift that families were able to really focus in on their child in that way. Like, that is so beautiful. So I'm thankful for all the families you got to work with in that. And I did as well in my practice. We did a lot more CPRT groups. And so, yeah, okay. Missy, any questions coming in from the chat currently with virtual sessions?
No questions coming in. Thank you for right now.
Okay. Well, I'll just kind of recap. It sounds like for each of us, kind of the highlights that people were focusing on when doing virtual sessions was age, attention span, and is this child able to get engaged? Have they had experience with school where they've been successful to where we know that we can actually do this? And then where it wasn't feasible maybe for some children to do that, then really honing in on equipping the parents. And so, yeah, again, Wonders and Worries has done those similar things too. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else to address before we pass it back to Missy. Missy, anything you wanted us to hit on with that last topic? I feel like you're the one that gets all the questions at the end when they come in on the evaluations.
Yeah, I don't see anything coming in right now. So I think, you know, unless you have some final thoughts on that, we can wind down. Oh, wait, something just came through. Hold on. Let me look at it.
Yay. You just ask it enough when people say, right?
Oh, it says, love the idea of filial therapy to train the parents to play with their own children therapeutically. Thanks for sharing, Leslie.
Yeah, it's so empowering to the parents, and they just really, I mean, what I always tell parents is, for a therapist or child life specialist, you know, it takes us a while to develop that trusting relationship with your child, because they have to learn to trust us. And parents are going into it already with that trusted relationship built. And so they're already, you know, 3-4 sessions ahead, just getting started. And that gives the parents a bit of confidence, as you mentioned, Crystal, that sometimes the parents just feel like, oh, that's just too much for me to take on, and I'm going to let you handle up on that. But when we let the parents know, you know, your relationship with your child is already steadfast, and although there might be some struggles in it, your child is bringing you those struggles because they trust and they know, because you've proven that unconditional love. You haven't left them. You're not going to. And so that's the power of that filial. And yeah, it's really neat.
I want to thank both of you, Leslie and Hayley. I love doing these because I get to chat with other professionals who are doing this work that's hard and good. And yeah, so thank you both for chatting. Thank you.
And I want to thank all
nice change of pace. It really was. I liked it.
So I'd love to thank the three of you. I feel like, you know, that while this was a different format for us, I do feel like we were sitting around having a conversation, and I appreciate all of you being so open and really vulnerable too, with your responses to these questions that really don't have specific answers, right? And sharing sort of from your perspective and how you framed up and decided to make the decisions you do. So I appreciate that, because it's not always the easiest thing to do, to go online and spill it. So I appreciate all three of you so much for being here. Thank you all for attending. A couple things I just wanted to let you know is that we do, hopefully many of you know about our Registered Wonders and Worries Provider Program. It is a training and support program based on our 6-session validated curriculum, which I am hopeful that y'all saw in the Journal of Child Life. There was just an article published that was based on research from our program. So we are thrilled and excited about that. So make sure you check out Journal of Child Life and the research study. But the Registered Provider Program is where we train people in that curriculum and then provide support and resources sort of to help them in their practice working with children of adult patients. So our next training is coming up November 8th through 10th. It will be online, virtual, but synchronous. So 3 days, and we'll work through the whole curriculum and the whole training session. And then you can receive 20 PDUs for that initial training. So certainly you can reach out to me directly if you want to know more about that training, or visit our website at that listed address right there. And then I'm going to click. So there's the QR code for the post-assessment certificate if you need to get it that way. You can also go to the website to find it as well. The QR code for our activity book is on here as well. And then I did want to let you know that our next webinar, WonderChat, will be on December 17th, 12 Central, 1 Eastern. And the topic is going to be on building resiliency, a brain-based perspective. You know how many times I practiced that and it still came out wrong? You have to really say it very slow. Building resiliency, a brain-based perspective. And I'm excited. It'll kind of go back to the format of a lot of education and didactic learning that way. So Anyway, I hope you'll join us. You'll see more about that coming out in our Tuesday tip email, so you can sign up for that webinar if you'd like. So again, to my speakers today, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. I love hearing from other experts in the field and in their respective fields, and sharing it with us. So I appreciate all three of you. Thank you everyone for attending, and I hope you will join us again.
Bye.